Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Brendan Zabricki, the town administrator, and
Recording
welcome.
in progress.
We are announcing that this presentation is being broadcast and recorded this evening. And before I introduce our presenter, the Affordable Housing Trust likely has a quorum participating, so the chair is going to call the Affordable Housing Trust to order.
I will call the Affordable Housing Trust to order for January 30th, 2025.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So tonight, we have John Cruz and his associates from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council who are going to present to us some information about something called a housing production plan. The Affordable Housing Trust in Essex is currently focusing on writing such a plan, and tonight you're going to learn all about what that is and what it entails. So, John, I'll pass it over to you, and Joan, you can mute us in the room. Thank you.
Brendan, thank you so much. What we're going to do is we're going to go right into our presentation. So I'm going to get my screen share going on here. All right, Brendan, can you give me a thumbs up that everything looks good on your end? All right, I think we're good. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We're very excited to see how all this is going to play out throughout this process. What we're going to be working on today is understanding. Oh, are we not seeing things in? Hold on. I'm going to bring this back up. Make sure you guys can see the screen as it's supposed to be seen. Play from current slide. Okay, I'm just going to share my whole desktop and see if that'll do the trick. All right, how do we look now, Emma? Can we see everything?
It's dark on my end.
It is dark on your end. Okay. Let me try one more thing here very quickly. Sometimes we have these little technical issues, folks, with the full screen on Zoom and trying to really make sense of all of that stuff. So I'm going to sign in to a different computer and try this. Okay, we're going to join. All right, now we're going to get the screen share going one more time. All right, that a little bit better?
That looks great.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all for bearing with us as we go through all of this. The challenges of doing things in real time are always super fun, but we're going to get there. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time out of your evening tonight to come out and hang out with us. We got a little really important stuff to talk about. What we're going to be doing is letting you all know some basics about what a housing production plan is. We know that the town has never gone through this process before, so it's all new information for all of you. We're also going to be talking about all the data that we've been putting together around housing in Essex and all the demographic stuff and really what all of that means. And as we're going through this process, we're also going to be asking you all to participate as well. So, for everybody who is in front of a computer or a tablet right now, you're going to be able to participate. If you're at home watching this on TV, or if you're at the town hall watching this, you'll be able to participate that way as well. We want to make sure that everybody has a chance to really lend their voices to us and let everybody be heard as part of this process. That's really, really important. I'm a really firm believer that everything that is done for a community, but not with a community, is done to a community. And we really want to make sure that everything that we are doing, that we're moving forward together, and that we are all participating in this, that we are all feeling as though there's a lot of really good a really, really good ownership on this, because this isn't us, this is you guys. But of course, who are us? Starting with myself, my name is John Cruz. I'm a senior housing and land use planner. The other member of our team who's not able to be here this evening is Andrea Harris Long. She's the director of land use and housing. She's providing a lot of oversight and thought leadership on this project. And I'm also joined this evening by my colleague, Emma Udelovich. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emma right now. And she's going to talk us through a lot of data about Essex housing after introducing herself.
Great. Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Udelovich. I'm a regional housing and land use planner 2 at MAPC, and I'm very excited to be supporting John, our advisory committee, and the rest of you in the completion of this document. So before we dive in, I wanted to take a moment to thank our advisory committee members who have been steering this project. Many of them of which are in the room, maybe even joining the virtual room. You can see their names displayed on the screen here. And we just want to reiterate, this is their plan, this is your plan. Our team at MAPC, we are just the vehicle to help complete this administrative document. And now that we've introduced ourselves, next slide, please. We want to know who's in the virtual room with us today. So on the screen here, you'll see, as John mentioned, our Menti links. All of our interactive engagement questions will be live on Mentimeter or Menti, and you can follow along from any device, whether it's by your phone or your computer. And there are 3 methods in which you can join. You can either go to menti.com and use our event code, which is 83017068, also displayed on the screen. Or you can select the link that will be posted in the chat. You can also scan the QR code presented on the screen. We're going to be using Mentimeter for the entire hour, so please don't close out the program. If you're having any difficulties, please let us know in the chat. And if you accidentally log out, no worries. This screen will be presented a couple times throughout this presentation. I also want to note that today's interactive survey will only be live during this presentation and will not be available after this webinar. But not to worry, this will not be the only opportunity for input on this plan and the data we're about to show you. At the end of today's presentation, we will share ways to get involved and stay informed. And it appears we have some more technical difficulties, so hopefully we can give ourselves a moment, give ourselves some grace with technology these days, and log in as soon as we can. I will also go on to continue to say that later when we go through our survey, feel free also to post anything in the chat. We will have some time later for a Q&A, about 30 minutes. If we can't get to all the questions, especially we're going to try to prioritize the folks who are in the room since they don't have access to the chat. If we don't get to all the questions in the room or in the chat, also not to worry, we will provide logistical information on how to either get in touch with us, and we'll also be recording all of the questions you have today and then posting them on the website.
Yeah, thank you so much for reiterating all of that stuff, Emma. I think that we are all all set here on our end. Let me make sure that this is all working. Okay, so I think that for those of you who have logged into Menti, you should be able to see the questions coming up. I see some people are already starting to respond, so I'm going to just go back to sharing the slideshow right now and seeing if this works. So, do we see? There we go. Okay. Yeah, when I switched computers to bring up the screen share issue, I wasn't logged into Mentimeter, so I apologize for that. But hopefully we're all set for right now. I'll send it back over to you, Emma.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you all for your flexibility with our tech today. So it's great. It seems that most of you have responded to what is your connection to Essex, whether you live and own here, live and rent, or one day would like to live in Essex. We can go on to the next question, which is how old are you? We're trying to get a sense of which age groups are represented in the room with your guests today. We're not talking through a lot of data about age per se in today's webinar, but you'll have access on the project website to the full housing needs assessment later, um, and can then see what that actually looks like. So this is great. We're also seeing a lot of folks um, participating on this one. We can go to the next, which in our next question, we wanted to share a sense of what households are like in Essex. So we'd love to know who may live in your household. Do you perchance live by yourself? Do you live with others, like roommates or family members? If you live with family, are they your kids or parents or maybe even your grandparents? And you can select multiple options here because we know that households are multifaceted and can contain a lot of folks. Great. And finally, our last introductory question, do you or any of your members of your households match the following descriptions? You can select more than one option here again. And this information, again, gives us a better sense of what types of homes and your possible needs are, and get a sense of, again, who's in the room with us today and what your households may look like. Great. Well, thank you all for participating. I think we have a good sense of who's in our virtual room with us. Now I'll pass it back to John, who will provide some more context on why we are here today. John?
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, Emma. Like we said before, this is a housing production plan, and it is something new for the town of Essex. So we want to make sure that we're all kind of working with the same set of facts as we move forward here. New uncharted territory can be a little bit scary, but I promise we're going to get through it together. What a housing production plan is this is it's a short-term plan. It's only has a lifespan of 5 years, and that's different than maybe a town comprehensive plan, which could have a 10 or 20-year outlook. This is something that's designed to have really limited goals and strategies that are feasible and realistic to be accomplished in a 5-year time span. And it's going to address both what the town's goals are and what the state's goals are for what they've set for towns in Massachusetts. Goals for the town of Essex specifically, we're talking about things that we're doing to be able to meet local housing need and address a range of unmet housing needs in your community. We want to be able to proactively influence the development. So that means guiding the type of development, how much development, the location of housing, all these sorts of things. And all these other requirements as far as working through Chapter 40B. We want to encourage 40B developments and discourage unfriendly ones. I know this is something that Essex hasn't had to really work through in the past. That doesn't mean it won't be something that they won't have to work through in the future. So we want to have a lot of systems in place where developers who want to do work in Essex understand what the community wants and needs, and will hopefully be a little bit more receptive to those needs as opposed to just doing what they want. We also want to be able to help the town go through a process of guided decisions for what should be done with property that could be used for housing. This includes town-owned property, but it's not limited to town-owned property. But we're looking for anywhere in town that could be suitable for housing development. This is not a affordable housing trust plan. This is not a housing authority plan. This is not a what do we do with town-owned land plan. This is not how many houses is the town going to build plan. This is a guiding administrative document that is designed to help the town figure out what actions can be taken to building more steps towards actually getting some affordable housing built. The state also sets a lot of goals for every city and town in Massachusetts. When something has a deed restriction on it, making it affordable in perpetuity, always tied to the income of the renter and things like that. These are subsidized housing units, and they go on to this big state database called the Subsidized Housing Inventory. So for every single home that has this deed restriction that says this place is affordable and it has to stay affordable legally, that number goes into the SHI. And what the state has said is that they want every municipality, every city and town to have at least 10% of their housing stock with a deed restricted affordability on it. And the idea is that that's just going to help a whole lot of people be able to find places to live. Essex is not currently at 10%. They're at 2.58%. And once you hit that 10% threshold, that means that you have the ability to be free and clear. People can't do 40B projects in your town legally if that's the situation. So that's kind of the carrot that the state gives all of us to say this is why you should be meeting your affordable housing goals is you have to either hit that 10% or show that you're making meaningful progress towards that 10% after having a housing production plan be enacted in order to be able to stave that stuff off. So that's the idea behind a lot of what we're doing, in addition to all the things that we talked about as far as town goals, being able to find the unmet housing need and work towards achieving housing stability for everybody in Essex and everyone who wants to be in Essex. This plan is going to have three big parts, in addition to a lot of other information and appendices and lots of other stuff like that. But the three big buckets are a comprehensive housing needs assessment, and this is a part that we've done a big chunk of the work on already. Emma's going to talk through a lot of that stuff here in a few minutes. What we do here is we find the most recently available census data. We pull in data from some other sources that have to do specifically with housing stock and demographics and housing sales prices and utilities and things like that. And we put together a whole bunch of data on it. We take a look at what the future population and housing needs are, specifically housing needs of low and moderate income households. We look at a lot of development constraints. I'll be back on later on to talk about that more with you all. The second section is the affordable housing goals, and these are big overarching goals that say, based on what the needs of the town are, these are the handful of things we're going to try to work towards. It's not going to be a lot of stuff. 3, 4, or 5 goals is typically consistent with what we do with housing production plans. And it is an actual numerical goal for annual housing production based on census numbers to be able to say a town has a certain number of year-round housing units. So based on that, how many more homes do we need to build in order to really meet this need? To make those goals actionable, we're also going to be looking at implementation strategies that will align with them. These include identifying specific sites for housing, opportunity sites. These are required by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Those are the folks who are part of the governor's office who give the final approval and approve all of these housing production plans. These sites for housing, like I said, they could be public or privately owned. This plan doesn't make a distinction between the two. And like I said earlier, this is not a public housing plan, and this is not a what do we do with public land plan. We're also going to be looking at other strategies around zoning, allocating resources and programs to housing, raising awareness of housing needs and opportunities, and things like that. What they look like right now, we don't know. We're still working through this process and gathering information and having conversations like the ones we're having this evening with a lot of different folks to try to put all of this into perspective. What I'm going to do right now is turn things back over to Emma, and she's going to walk us through the housing needs assessment data and shine a little bit of light on some of the things that we're seeing happening in Essex.
Thanks, John. So yeah, like John said, we wanted to take this opportunity to share some of the most interesting findings and data points from the housing needs assessment. For instance, some of the key takeaways from the analysis include that families call Essex home. Nearly 3/4 of the households in Essex are family households who are majority homeowners. And what may or may not be surprising to you all is Essex is expensive. Over 1/3 of renter households are cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And it's not an exception for homeowners. At least 2/3 of households cannot afford a conventional mortgage if they're looking to buy today. And finally, all recent residential development has been single-family homes. There has been a little recent development since 2020, but most of them have been building permits that have been geared towards single-family homes. As we share the next set of interesting graphs from our analysis, we also want to hear from you all. If you rejoin our Mentimeter survey through the code or the QR code found on this slide, or follow the link that I posted in the QA chat, you can access the corresponding live survey questions. If you have any questions or comments on what may be striking or missing from the data we're about to show, please feel free to share it in the Q&A. We will have, like I said earlier, we'll have about 30 minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A, with priority for those who may be joining in the room at the town hall viewing session, and then turn to the chat box, the Q&A chat box. And again, not to worry if we don't get to any of your questions tonight. We'll post all questions and answers to our project website. And as a reminder, this is a live survey, and we will close at the end of this webinar. And at this point, hopefully everyone has been able to rejoin Mentimeter, and I'll move us forward to our next data point, which focuses on household sizes in Essex. So throughout our data analysis, we found most homes are suitable for families with children having 3 or more bedrooms. At 69% of homes in Essex have 3 or more bedrooms. The average household size in Essex is about 2.8 persons per household, which I know is kind of weird to have a decimal point for the count of people, but that's the average. And this is roughly equates to about 2 parents and a child. These households can be reasonably accommodated, however, with only 2 bedrooms. For our survey question, please take a minute to think about your home and family. Is your home, this is a bit of a Goldilocks question, but is it too big? Is it just right? Is it too small? I see we already have some great responses rolling in. I'll give it a second for those who were just joining this slide. Great, I'm not seeing any more movement on those numbers. So for the next type of homes, for the types of homes in Essex, data show that nearly 2/3 of all homes are detached single-family homes. And that's sitting at a little over 900 houses in Essex being single-family homes. In this next survey question, we want you to think about the types of homes you, your family, your neighbors, your friends, and fellow community members, what types of housing they may need or you may need. What additional housing types would you want to see in your town? You can select more than one option. And I know we're realizing we don't have an actual chat, we just have a Q&A. But if there are other options that may not be represented on our survey answers, please feel free to drop those in those comments and additional options in the Q&A chat. Great. When we break down housing in Essex by households that rent or own, we see that most of the community actually own their home, with a few that rent and a few vacant homes that could be either seasonal or in a period of transition. We want to get a sense from you all now that if you have at any point of your adult life rented your home, This is not including a time in which you may shared a dorm room or a house with college roommates. But maybe you rented a place after college on your own or with a partner or with roommates. Maybe it's a long time ago or not that long at all, actually. Or maybe you just have owned your home since you have been living on your own. Great. Seeing some last responses roll in. But now I think we'll move on to our next data point, in which we break down median household income by owners and renters. And here we find a significant gap between owner and renter income. We're going to continue to look into why this may be. But if you have any insights or theories, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat box. This is something we're going to be looking into in further research in the Essex Housing Production Plan, but just something we wanted to bring to note since it was a pretty significant data point. In our next slide, when we think about income and actually being able to afford a place to live, we find some significant gaps here presented in our data graph. Now let's go through it piece by piece. The reddish brown bar represents the median household income in Essex, which is sitting at just under $134,000. The pink bar represents the median household income needed to afford rent in Essex, which is a little over $74,000. And our analysis found that only 29% of current households in Essex make less than $74,000, and so therefore cannot afford median rent. Now you'll notice a difference between the green and the dark blue bars compared to the reddish brown median household income bar. Here we see a sizable gap between median household income and the amount of income needed to buy a home in Essex. The green bar represents the income needed for a family to afford a home with a conventional mortgage. That income is about sitting at $200,000. So a household would need to bring in that type of income. And for context, a conventional mortgage requires 20% of the house sale price to be paid upfront. Our analysis found that about 70% of households in Essex would not be able to buy a home with a conventional mortgage if they were looking to buy today. This gap increases by $91,000 if a family was trying to buy a home with a low down payment mortgage, which is represented in the dark blue bar. A low down payment mortgage usually requires 3% of the house sale price to be paid upfront, but a higher income is needed. That's why we see an increase in the blue bar in order to pay off the mortgage over a longer period of time. So overall, I know this was a lot of data, a lot of graph, but overall, this graph tells us that it is currently difficult to afford buying a home in Essex, and there is a sizable affordability gap. In our next survey question, we want to know if this data resonates with you. If your family was looking to move from an apartment with your current income into a single family home in Essex, would you be able to afford to do so? And again, listing reasons in the chat means the Q&A chat, since we don't have a chat feature. Great. I think we hit our total. I'm not seeing any more votes come in. So now let's consider the impact housing costs have on families who are already living in Essex. So before we were just looking at a graph to see how affordability plays out with wanting to rent or buy in Essex, but let's talk about the families who are currently renting and owning in Essex. So Cost burden is a term we use to define if we are spending too much of our income on housing, specifically if households pay 30% or more of their pre-tax income on housing costs. And severe cost burden is when 50% or more of pre-tax income is spent on housing costs. So those are our technical terms. Our first graph in the next slide shows about 515 homes, or 30% of Essex families, are cost burden, paying more than 30% of their income on housing. In the next slide, when we break it down, the number of cost burden households by renters and owners, we see that around 363 owner households are cost burden in total. And when we break that down to 30% versus 50%, we see there is a significant subset that are severely cost burden. That's the graph on the right. For cost burden renters, there is a slight majority that are severely cost burden at around 88 households, and about 64 households are cost burdened. So we're seeing an impact on households currently in Essex. We were interested in how cost burden affected household types and found that small family households, in the next slide, are more severely cost burdened compared to other households. That's the graph straight in the middle, small family households, especially when compared to family or non-family households. The data also shows that elderly households are most cost burdened in comparison to other family types. And that's the graph on the absolute left, the very left. So we are seeing an impact on families and on the elderly residents in Essex. Again, we want to take a moment to see if this data resonates with you all. In any point in your past, have you paid more than 30% of your pre-tax income on your rent or mortgage? And this includes property tax. Now, I want to note this is your past. In our next question, we'll talk about your present and current living situation, but right now we're talking about your past living situations. And if you're unsure, go ahead and select no. Great. So now come back to the present. In our next question, like I said, this is going to be talking about the present in your current home. Would you say you spend more than 30% of your pre-tax income on your rent or mortgage, including property taxes? And we're seeing a lot of variation. And again, if you don't know, it's okay to say no. And what would be really interesting is if you went home, did the math, and let us know what you find. Great. Well, I'm not seeing the numbers change anymore, so thank you all for going through the housing needs assessment data for Essex and for participating in our interactive survey. I'm now going to pass it back to John to go over development trends in Essex.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. What we did was we worked with Brendan and we worked with all the folks in the building and permitting in Essex, and we wanted to see what was actually happening as far as what's been built recently, to see if it could give us any kind of indication as far as is the market leaning a certain way, are there certain areas of town that are more desirable than others, and things like that. And what we found is that since 2020, the only developments that have happened have either been single family homes or buildings that have two homes in them. So maybe small condos or something like that. And it's a little bit all over the place. We're going to be doing a little bit of a deeper dive into these sites to see if there's anything that's particularly appealing about it, or if folks are just kind of going where it makes the most financial sense. We know a lot of these places are not necessarily going to work for housing locations. just because of a lot of other constraints issues. But it's important to understand what the market is and important to understand what things look like, just to make sure that all the things that we're doing, it's a good gut check for all of that kind of stuff. So we take a look at things like this. This shows us exactly what's been happening. And as you can see, 1 and 2 family all over the place for what it is. Not a whole lot else. And it's easy enough that we can plot all of it on this chart and see what it all looks like. As part of this process that I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a lot of different development constraints that are going to impact what gets built and where it gets built. And these get put into 2 basic categories. One is the natural development constraints. Those are things like flooding areas, marsh areas, wetlands, things like that. We want to avoid places like protected species habitats. We want to avoid places where the soil's too hard or too soft to reasonably develop. Places where there's a lot of slopes in the grade, where somebody might need to come in with an excavator and level the land out first. Gets expensive, gets problematic, never know what you might find. We generally want to avoid sites that require a whole lot of that stuff. There's also a lot of man-made constraints that affect what can happen. That includes things like the location of infrastructure, like roadways, water, and sewer. It includes deed restrictions, such as protected open space, where there's some law in the book somewhere that says a certain piece of land can't be developed. And then other development regulations, things like zoning and building codes, other sorts of different dimensional requirements, and things that really dictate what can go where and how it gets built. So we're looking at all of this stuff and we're trying to look at it as holistically as we can. We're going to share some of these maps that we've put together around constraints with you all tonight, just so you can see part of what we're looking at. And of course, there's all these other systems that are in place as well that we're considering as well. And these are going to be things like capacity of school systems, of roadways, of water systems, water and sewer capacity, emergency response, things like that. These are all things that are part of society that we're taking into account when we make these decisions. The first map that I want to share with you all is a flood hazard map. This data comes from FEMA. Um, uh, and this is part of what's called a firm map, a flood insurance rate map. And we know we generally want to avoid these areas, both because it's going to be challenging and expensive to insure these areas that are prone to flooding. And also, of course, we're not going to be recommending areas where folks are potentially going to live underwater just at the sake of being able to have affordable housing. That's not fair. We're not doing that stuff. There's also protected open space that I mentioned earlier. This is land that somehow, for some reason, either through a local bylaw or something the state legislature has done or something else, basically says this land can't be developed. So there's a lot of reasons as to why this could happen. It could be conservation land, it could be a national park, who knows? But it basically means this stuff is essentially off limits. We will not be able to develop here. So we're not going to be considering any of the sites in green. We're going to keep the open space open space. In a similar vein, we have wetlands, and there's a lot of different types of wetlands. It ranges from lakes and ponds to marine deep water and marine wetlands and things like that. These are all really important parts of the ecosystem. They're important to make sure that there's places for the land to absorb water runoff and places where the tide gets high and where water levels rise so it doesn't impact the rest of the community too much. So again, something else that we're considering, something else that we have to take into account. What you're starting to notice by now is that a lot of these are similar in their overlap, and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. So as we see all these constraints and we start looking at places where we can't build, it becomes a little bit more obvious where we should be looking and starting to put all these pieces together as far as what makes sense. The place that we're going to be looking at the most is going to be places that have water and sewer access. And this map it's not all of town like we had it before. It's zoomed in quite a bit. This is in the context. All this yellow is some additional land that the state feels it would be very difficult to develop on, specifically to develop multifamily on. So we're going to be taking that into account as well. But one of the challenges that we know is happening in Essex is that it's challenging to build any kind of multifamily homes just because when we have to do all this sort of water and septic stuff on site, you need bigger parcels, you need a lot more land, the cost goes up, and it becomes really challenging to make that work just from a financial pro forma perspective. So we're going to be primarily looking at places that either already have water or sewer access or are adjacent to water and sewer access, because we know that there's money from the state, there's money from MassWorks and some of these other programs that will allow for extensions of water and sewer into new developments if there's affordable housing that's attached to all of that. So we're going to be looking at places that are along these lines primarily. If you have other thoughts on other places we should be looking, let us know. But one of the challenges, and usually with the questions that we ask with these sorts of housing production plan engagements, is we ask people, where would you like to see housing? Where would it make the most sense to do multifamily? Because we have so many constraints in Essex, and a lot of the natural landscape is already kind of dictating where we're going. The sewer lines and the water lines are already kind of built up around those constraints and are doing a lot to alleviate that work. So we see this as really the places where it's going to start. And we'd really appreciate thoughts from you all if you have anything to lend in the chat as far as places along here where we should be looking, or any other spots at all that would make for reasonable housing spots, especially for anything that is going to be multifamily, and particularly small multifamily. We know that Essex does not have the support systems or the land or any of these other things that play into what could lend its way to large apartment complexes. It's just not a realistic situation here, and we're not even really going to talk about it. We know that it's a non-starter. We know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do that. So understand, we're not going to be coming in here recommending that we find a large plot of land that doesn't have a whole lot of constraints on it and say, perfect, we can build some giant apartment building here with 200 homes. That's not what we're doing. It's not going to happen. We're taking a very realistic lens through all of this, and doing exactly what we can to kind of make the most sense out of it. But primarily, this is where we're going to look. We understand that this is a man-made constraint, and we're going to work our way through it as best we can. So another thing is making sure that we're asking you all if there's other constraints we should be considering. In a little bit, I'll talk about the link to all the different places where we can view some of the other maps that we put together and things like that. But for right now, um, if there's anything else that we need to know about or things that we haven't covered today, let us know. And I see one response here so far, and that's fantastic. I got a piece of mail today from the trustees actually that I need to open and see what's going on with them. And yeah, it does absolutely limit the available Essex land. So we have to work with what we have. I'm going to keep on moving for right now. If anybody has any thoughts, they're certainly welcome to share them through the Q&A or to email to either Emma and I. And I want to take a second now to talk through the timeline that we have here a little bit. And where we are right now is in kind of these two phases, the exploring and data gathering, as well as the constraints and opportunities. And a lot of these don't necessarily have dependencies, so we don't have to do something else first. But we are working on constraints analysis. We've gone through some land use and zoning audit. We're doing public engagement right now, working with all of you. We've also had some focus groups and a lot of other conversations and things like that. So there's a lot going on, and we're doing a really good job, I think, of working with you all. And we've gotten great feedback from everybody. Everybody that we've talked to has been so helpful and so excited to be able to have these conversations with us. It's really been just a wonderful experience. As we move forward throughout the year, as we start putting these goals and strategies together and figuring out a site selection for a handful of spots that we think would make for some really good public housing, I'm sorry, not public housing, affordable housing, we're going to come back to you all with a different engagement activity. I don't know if it's going to be a webinar or a survey or something else, but you all registered, so we have your email address so we can reach out again and let you all know what that's going to look like. And what we're going to do is come back to you with all the different draft options, draft goals, draft strategies, draft housing locations. And we're going to ask you all, did we get this right? And if not, let us know and we'll figure it out. So that's going to take us kind of through the first half of the year. The second half of the year is going to be refining our goals and strategies. It's going to be putting in some extra work to figure out what we need to do to get all of the document stuff tightened up. So it is going to be an actual big document, a big old PDF for y'all to be able to dig into. And once we have all of that stuff together, we put the housing plan together, the executive summary, some other educational materials. It'll get posted on the town website. There's going to be an open comment period. And then once all of that is satisfied from a legal requirement, the idea is that hopefully we'll schedule a joint meeting between the planning and select boards. So that way everybody has a chance to talk things through in person, ask the same questions together, get everyone on the same page. And ideally, at that meeting, they will vote to adopt the plan, at which point we send it off to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to have them review it and give their seal of approval on it. So that's what's going to happen as it takes us through the rest of this process throughout the remainder of the calendar year. So we got a long ways to go just yet. We want to keep you all involved and really learning more about what's happening. So we have this project website. It's at mapc.ma/essexhpp. And you can scan the QR code. You can go to the website. On there, you're going to find project updates. You're going to find presentations from prior committee meetings. Right now, we've had 2 meetings with the Affordable Housing Trust Committee on this issue. Both of the PowerPoints that we put together for those meetings are online. And if you download the one from the second meeting, it's going to have much more housing needs assessment than what we showed you all tonight. We didn't want to overload you with data. We know it's a lot of new stuff and likely a lot of indicators that you haven't seen before. So we want to be mindful of that. It's also, 7:45 in the evening. Our brains can only absorb so much. So I hope that you'll go check that out later on, browse that at your leisure, take a look at everything that's in place. And there's also going to be additional constraints maps other than what I've shown you all. There's a zip file with all the PDFs that was put online today. And we'll also have a video recording of this webinar available. So it's not just going to be available through the town channels, it's going to be on this website as well. Push forward onto, I think, the MEPC YouTube channel. To figure things out moving forward, we want to do a quick little visioning exercise, and we're asking everyone to say, what is one word you would use to describe the ideal Essex in the future? And it's a little word cloud activity, so feel free to type whatever word that you want, and we'll see how things look. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think that this is a really beautiful vision for a future of a community, for sure. Cohesion, common sense, balancing, rural, small. These are definitely things that we're keeping in mind, and it's helpful to have this up in front of us as well. So beautiful. I love the way these things change as they kind of go through the little different iterations as we get more information from you all. Really cool stuff. So that is everything that we have for today. This is my email and Emma's email. And feel free to reach out to us at any point. Our contact information is also on the project website. So don't be shy. If you have questions or anything that we can answer, we are certainly very happy to hear it. Happy to talk through any issues you have, any suggestions or recommendations about this. We know that this is really something that is going to be the best version of what it is because of all of you and lending your thoughts to all of it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop my screen share and open things up for comments. Before I go to anything that's online, Brendan, is there anybody in the room that has questions for us?
Hi, John. No, it turns out that most people took advantage of not leaving their house on this cold night. There are members of the Affordable Housing Trust in the room, but not any members of the general public. So I think you can concentrate on whatever questions come in over the Q&A feature on Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. We do have one right now that I'm going to address. If anybody has any more, please feel free to go ahead and type them. The question is, if we have found that Essex does not have the space to add affordable/additional housing, would that get the 10% reduced? I am not a state official, so I cannot answer that with absolute certainty, but I can answer it with some pretty decent certainty. No municipality in Massachusetts has ever been successful in getting their SHI numbers reduced. That 10% is for everybody across the board, and it's really less a question about space or adding additional housing or anything else. The community feels, the state feels that this is an achievable goal for just about everybody, regardless of what the community size is. So that includes folks like you all and other small communities in the region, including folks like Nahat and things like that. So we don't really have an avenue to getting that number reduced. I think that the reasonable options would be towards building small incremental improvements to that over time, because if you're able to make those improvements and you're able to build a little bit of housing units year after year after year, then you can also hit those goals as far as being able to make sure that 40Bs don't come to town and things like that. But otherwise, everyone's kind of stuck with what the state has. And anybody else have any thoughts, questions, concerns that they want to lend to us before we close up for the evening? We do have okay, we got a couple more rolling in. How can we preference Essex people versus people who don't live in Essex? And this is a question that's really common that we get for a lot of different communities. What we're allowed to do with affordable housing is it goes through a lottery process, and you're allowed to have a certain number of units set up for local preference. And we'll talk with Brendan a little bit more about that and what that means and how that gets entailed. Basically, you can't exclude everybody. You can't do things that say this is only something that's available for a certain community, regardless of where it is. It's a statewide lottery for affordable housing. What you can do is you can say for any project that's coming down the pipe that a certain number of the affordable units have to have a local preference, which are going to be essentially earmarked. So if anybody from the community applies and they're approved, then they would all have that preference and have that priority bumping up of other things that have happened. There's another question in here for, do we have examples of how other small communities have done this inspiration for us? Yeah, we actually do. So all of the questions that we're getting from you all tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to put them into a big Q&A document, and it's going to go onto the public website that we put together. And I can't tell you all the communities that have adopted and not adopted a housing production plan right off the top of my head. But because they're all approved by the state and the state has this process for all of it, it means they have a whole big long list on the state website of all the different housing production plans that have been approved, that are currently in use, and you can click through and download and take a look at them. Additionally, and this is something that you'll see if you download the other presentations that we've given to the committee, is that there is a a methodology that we put together for determining peer communities. So looking at all the other communities across the region that are really similar to Essex in a lot of key demographics. And we're looking at those communities and their housing production plans to see what they've done as well. So you'll be able to see that it's called the context communities analysis. And that's, I want to say, in the first presentation that we did for them, but it might be in the second. Okay, I'm getting nods from Emma. So yeah, the first presentation to the committee is where you can find the information of kind of where we're looking a little bit deeper for inspiration as well. We have a question about property taxes being very high. Can we afford the adverse impacts of more affordable housing? Without looking at the direct financial impacts of that, I can't answer that directly. What I can say is that this is not nonprofit housing, and this is not something like housing authority where the properties entirely are getting taken off the tax rolls. That's not what this is. So even for properties that are marked as deed restricted affordable, there will be a little bit of a way that the assessment changes as far as how the town assessor looks at property. Obviously, something that has 10 market rate units is probably going to be a little bit more valuable and worth a little bit more than a property that has 8 market rate units and 2 affordable rate units. But I doubt that's going to really impact the expenses that you all are paying right now for your property taxes. We understand that that's very high, and there's nothing about this that should directly affect that in a negative way. There's a question: has any affordable housing ever been built without government subsidies ever? And the answer is yes. Most of them, I don't want to say most, I don't know if that's true. A lot of them in Massachusetts are not built with government subsidy. So what happens is that when you have market rate affordable housing, usually what happens is that becomes part of an inclusionary zoning provision or a different just kind of provision as far as responding to a development RFP. And it's not the same as like Section 8. So somebody who's renting an affordable unit isn't being given a check, and there's not like a check going from the government to the landlord or something like that. Basically, what happens is you tell the developer you're usually allowed to build a little bit more than you would under the current zoning. But in order to do that, you have to have a certain number of units be deed restricted affordable and tied to somebody's income. So really what happens is the other people who are living in that development are subsidizing the affordable units through the rent that they pay. So this is not something that is going to be a cost to you all unless it is something that is explicitly done through municipal means. So this would be like housing authority property and stuff like that. That's a component to this, but that's not the whole thing. There's a question about can the housing and plan include rental units and or ownership units? Yes. So this is not either a rental plan or a home ownership plan. That is it's something that just kind of addresses housing for everybody. Um, there was a follow-up around if anything has been built without government subsidies. Yes, that is a subsidy. It is not a government subsidy. It is a subsidy being provided through the market. So that's the key difference here. There's a question saying affordable housing must be deed restricted, correct? Yes, that is correct. The way that this works, in order for a housing unit, a home, to go on the SHI, it has to have a deed restriction on it for it to be affordable in perpetuity. And what affordable means is that it's going to be making sure that people who are living there are not cost burdened. So it's going to be that cap of 30% of their income going towards rent or going towards the mortgage is going to be the income qualifier. What that looks like, there's a lot of different ways that could happen. There's a lot of different breakdowns for affordability based on these classifications defined by HUD, but that's a little bit of a different thing. At the end of the day, yes, they have to be deed restricted in order to count towards the SHI. So those are the types of things that we're going to be looking for. About how many units need to be built in Essex in order to reach the goal of 10%. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I will find it. I know that we have um, um all of the information on the number of households and the number of people. So we'll make sure that we get you a more direct answer to that when we get the Q&A document online. There's a question about when do we anticipate completing this? We anticipate this being done at the end of the calendar year for this year. So a little bit earlier on, we had a slide that came up with the timeline. The timeline's a little loose, and we know things get a little bit tricky around trying to schedule meetings, especially meetings for special projects like this, while planning boards and select boards are trying to wrap up their business for the end of the year. So we're hoping that we'll be able to have this happen sometime in December, likely between Thanksgiving and Christmas. But we know there's additional challenges with that, so it might get pushed to January. But the goal is to have all this wrapped up by the end of 2025. All right, I'm not seeing anything else, so I just want to thank you all for coming out and hanging out with us tonight. If you all have had the Bruins game on in the background, I don't blame you. That's just kind of the way of the world. So we're all doing what we can to get through. Thank you all very much. I appreciate all of you being here. I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more from you as we go throughout this process. All of you who registered, you will get an email when all of this information is online, when this video is online. Please send it to your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues. Post it on Nextdoor, post it on the Facebook groups. Let people know what's going on. The more information that we have from folks, the more people reach out to us and engage, the easier it is going forward. Nobody likes to feel like anything is being done without their notice or without anything going on. And I certainly get why people feel alarmed when they see something show up on a select board agenda that they had no idea what was happening. So I'm asking you all for a lot of help on this, for awareness and letting people know what's going on. And again, thank you all so much. Stay safe, and looking forward to continuing this conversation with you all very soon. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Emma. Just want to thank MAPC for doing all this work, showing us all of this great data that they've been collecting since they started this project. And of course, if you have other questions, you can also reach out to me at Town Hall or connect with me over the website. My email is right there. And on behalf of the Affordable Housing Trust and the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, have a good night. I bid you peace.